Hey folks, I'm Spencer. On today's episode of Cult Mania we're looking at the Rodriguez-Tarantino double feature, Grindhouse.
Planet Terror and Death Proof. Only at the Grindhouse.
Comprised of Planet Terror, Death Proof and a bunch of mock trailers created by filmmakers like Rob Zombie, Edgar Wright and Eli Roth, Grindhouse was pretty much a homage, a love letter to the drive-in double features of the 1970s. And whilst I think both films are really interesting on their own, this is a review of the entire double feature experience. So these are the shortened versions of these films. I will go into a little bit of detail about the changes, but know that this is about the whole thing watched as one rather than a review of Planet Terror and a review of Death Proof.
2 no-holds-barred feature-length motion pictures.
After we get our they're now very iconic, and I think this film is a large part why, the coming attractions title cards, the feature presentation title cards with the funky fanfare, we get a mock trailer for Machete, which Rodriguez did actually make the film, and it's incredibly accurate to what this trailer portrays. And I think opening with this trailer was incredibly important because it completely sets the stall out for what you are going into. But then, of course, we go straight into
Planet Terror,
which is Rodriguez's zombie exploitation sci-fi mashup of awesomeness. Rodriguez had actually had the idea for Planet Terror years and years before, claiming that he knew that zombies were going to be the next big thing. Then he actually got about 20 pages into the script and never finished it, and then zombies became a huge thing. So he went, damn, should have written that, and then wrote it. And it ended up in Grindhouse. Now, whilst the film is pretty much just a ragtag group of survivors must fight against mutated zombie people, it feels like far more than that. That's mainly helped by the fact that the characters are all ridiculously over the top. These zombies are even more over the top. I mean, these are the lumpiest, bumpiest, most pus-filled, explodey zombies ever. Speaking of explodey zombies, actually, whoever made the squibs for this film deserves all of the medals ever, because any time a zombie is shot in this, it is glorious. And whilst that sort of sheer splatter, insanity, zombies being run over, zombies being blown up, people being shot, legs being cut off, legs being replaced with M16s, whilst that is all really freaking awesome, so much of the heart of what makes Planet Terror awesome is the characters in it, which sounds really silly. I mean, Rose McGowan is on top sassy form. She's brilliant as Cherry. It's great watching Freddie Rodriguez and Michael Biehn just attempt to outgruff one another. You get that fantastic cameo from Bruce Willis just for whatever reason. You've got Josh Brolin chewing on a thermometer and very much chewing on the scenery, trying to be as overtly evil as possible. I think the main takeaway is that everyone gets the joke. Everyone gets that they should be a ridiculous caricature and commit to it without ever... It feels like everyone respects the film but knows that it's supposed to be dumb as anything. The film is, at least in its Grindhouse presentation, incredibly well paced. It absolutely barrels along. There is not... I'm sure it perhaps pauses for 5 minutes every now and again before something else disgusting happens or someone says something awesome. And B, looks fantastic. I mean, the way they get the contrast in this film is incredible. The absolute sort of jet black night sky always looks awesome, and I love the sort of over-the-top sort of yellows and greens that they used to light the film. It really does look seedy, even if you haven't got all of the ridiculous grain over the top. But you have got ridiculous grain over the top, along with scratches, light leaks, fingerprints. It works incredibly, incredibly well. I think some people seem to think that the film looks over the top. It doesn't. If you've ever seen any of like the sort of trailer reels that have been put out for drive-in theatre, they look disgusting. So I would happily say that this is an accurate representation of seeing a drive-in film. The only thing that lets this sort of element of Planet Terror down is that the film's digitally shot. I mean, you know, there are CGI sequences, and you can just tell that underneath all of the sort of the grot that has been put over the top of it, it just has that light sharpness to it. It's a little bit too clear in a few little sequences. I mean, but this is me nitpicking, this is me being a massive like film celluloid nerd, so I'm sure this won't bother anyone else. Also, I have to say, just tiny little bit, props to the soundtrack that Robert Rodriguez did himself. It doesn't matter whether it's the sort of sleazy blues theme that kicks off the film and sort of recurs every now and again, or the squelchy synth, sort of ominous, overtly horror elements. It always seems to marry up perfectly, and it's just really cool. Once Planet Terror's over, we're into another batch of trailers, so I'm going to review each one in one sentence.
Werewolf Women of the SS.
It's probably my favourite of these trailers because it's absolutely freaking insane and has a ridiculous cast list for a stupid trailer, and I really, really wish they'd actually made this film.
Don't.
It's a great concept. The idea that there were so many don't movies came out, and it's got some great sight gags, but I do think it leans a bit too heavy on shouting don't at you at the end. It's a little bit irritating after 30 seconds of it.
Thanksgiving.
Is probably the most accurate to a film that would have come out at this time. It really, really looks right. I can 100% imagine someone digging up a film that is exactly this. Then we go into
Death Proof.
or Quentin Tarantino's Thunderbolt, as it was clearly supposed to be called. And I think that's a really cool nod to the idea that this film has been re-edited by whoever owned the drive-in that we are sat at. The film follows two different groups of women who are stalked by the vehicular maniac Stuntman Mike, played by Kurt Russell, who is one of my all-time favourite actors and appears to be having a whale of a time in this film. And I have to say, the idea of a car as your serial killer weapon, really, really cool. I think that's mainly because, firstly, this film has one of the best car crashes in any film. I mean, it knows it's awesome because it shows it you about 4 different times. And secondly, it has one of the most crazy, tense, I was going to call it a car chase, but it's more like a car duel. I mean, if anyone has seen the end of Death Proof, you know that that scene with Zoe Bell on the hood of the car whilst they're fighting with cars and she's really on the hood, I mean, it's insane and it is genuinely tense and terrifying to watch. I will say, I don't think the characters are nearly as good in Death Proof as they are in Planet Terror or generally in other Tarantino films. I think Stuntman Mike is awesome and his undoing is awesome, but you spend the first half of the film with the one group of girls and they're really quite irritating. I didn't like them at all, and whilst I like the second group a lot more, if you watch the Grindhouse edit of this film, you spend less time with them because there's like a whole 11-minute scene that is cut out of their section of the film. And I can understand why, because it retreads a lot of stuff from the first half, but it is a shame because they're more interesting. I'd rather they cut down the first half than the second half.
Do I frighten you? Is it my scar? It's your car.
But the film does look really awesome. Tarantino was his own director of photography, and you can tell that he knows exactly how to make something look like a cheap 70s exploitation film, because every camera position feels just right. There's never anything that's too over the top. It really helps that the film is shot on film, because it just has that texture, the way the light looks, the way the neon in the bar looks. It all just works that little bit better than Planet Terror in regards to looking like a real drive-in movie. I do think it's interesting that a lot of the sort of excessive scratches, the light leaks, all that sort of stuff is very much downplayed at the end of Death Proof, to the point that I wondered if they'd forgot to put them on. But I think the idea is that they know the car chase is awesome, they know that people want to see the car chase, so they don't hide it behind a bunch of filters and edits. It's there pristine for you to see, and to see that the stunt work is all real. This film has a fantastic pop-scored soundtrack. I mean, it's a Tarantino film, what do you expect? The guy knows how to put music on a film. Even if you do go, if this was a low-budget 70s film, how on earth they're getting the rights to use T-Rex, I have no idea. But this brings me on to the point of, these aren't supposed to be lost films. They're not made in the 70s, they're made now. And I think this is quite a strange choice, but I get it. Sort of, you know, in Planet Terror you have a bunch of bits where people talk about Bin Laden. In both films you have people texting key plot points based around that. I think it's just weird because you have so much of this aesthetic, the way people are dressed, everything like that is so 70s, that these weird now moments, I kind of just get the idea that they're supposed to just be films of now, because the films that they're representing were so tied to the time they were made in. But it does also just seem to be a bit of a weird clash with the aesthetic that we're looking at.
Ladies, we're gonna have some fun.
But then you do come to the fact that, and I think this is the key difference between the two films, Planet Terror is an idealised version of a crummy Grindhouse exploitation film, because it's so over the top and they use CGI to do things that they could never ever do on this type of film back in the day. It's the film that so many posters and trailers promised you. It's the film you wanted to go and see, not the film that you actually ended up seeing. Whereas Death Proof feels so much more like Tarantino stripping away everything that he's sort of built up the ability to have, and he's solely trying to make something with the restrictions that these filmmakers had. You know, it is a film that has two big set pieces and a lot of talking. It feels much more like the sort of film that you would see at that time, rather than the sort of film that you expect to see at that time. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. Basically, Planet Terror, the fantasy of those films, Death Proof, much more the reality of those films, but a really good version of them. If you see the films in this double feature version, yes, you're getting the trailers in the middle, you are getting a lot more aggressive film damage, but you are getting shorter versions of the films. You're really not losing anything massive in Planet Terror. There's like some dialogue is cut down. There is one pretty good joke that I think is cut, which is a shame. Death Proof suffers a lot more because where Planet Terror has a missing reel as a joke, that reel doesn't exist. If you see Death Proof through this version, the missing reel is a scene that you will see if you get the standalone DVD version. And there is, like I said, that whole 11 minutes missing from the second half of the film. I'm the sort of person that likes to see everything in a film, but I think I would rather sacrifice those little sections, or Death Proof, a big section, to enjoy having the trailers in the middle, the chopped up nature, because this is the more fun way to see both films. It's great. I watched, it's 3 hours plus. It never gets boring seeing it this way. I think if it was, half an hour longer because you put back in all those scenes, it might start to feel a bit tedious.
Rejoice!
Regardless of which way you want to see these films, I think they're incredibly important. We have gotten so many great throwback films in recent years since this game. I'm not trying to say that it hadn't been done before, but I think Grindhouse proved that you could do it. You could go this heavy into it and it could be financially viable. I think it's great that it had a literal impact because we got Machete and we got Hobo with a Shotgun, which was a trailer that was sent in for a competition that they ran and it won. And, Hobo with a Shotgun is fantastic. I'm looking forward to reviewing that for the channel at some point. But also films like Mandy or The Void that we've gotten more recently, they're not necessarily the exact same thing, but I don't think people would fund them in the same way if we didn't have Grindhouse. I think they have benefited from the success of. And so has the film restoration market, so has, I don't think we would have the money going into people like Arrow and Blue Underground and 88 Films and Sex, because this drew attention to all the films that they have put out since. I think it just whipped up such an interest in these old films again that now films that were never going to be re-released have been. And I'm not trying to pin that all on Grindhouse and say, it's the holy grail of cult movies because it gave us all this. But I do think it had such an impact that just got to be slightly thankful that it did happen. But that is just my opinion. Have you seen Grindhouse? Have you seen it in this full form? Or do you prefer watching the film separately? Let me know down in the comments. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos. And I shall see you next time.